Yes, yes, yes. Um, Very nice to have you here, sir. How are you?
I'm doing well. And yourself?
I can't complain. I can't complain. I'm looking forward to speaking with you. You have a lot of vital information that parents are going to need to hear with school starting up very soon. So let's
Absolutely.
jump right into it, if you don't mind.
Sure thing.
Before we get into it, we talk about inflation, but people might not have an idea of exactly what it is. If you can just briefly explain what inflation does to the dollar and how that affects back to school shopping.
Yeah, in its simplest, terms, inflation is just the increased price of services and goods, and then the diminishment of the dollar or money. And I know that you can remember back in the day when we can buy a bag of chips for 25 to 50 cents, where now you're paying $2, to get that same bag of chips. And so, just as time goes on, cost of goods and services go up.
Definitely. And which back to school items have you seen go up in value this year?
Man, there are a ton of items that have gone up. In particular, your glue for elementary school kids, tape has gone up, pencils, pens. There are a couple of suggestions that I actually have, for parents when you think about some of these school supplies that you might need to start to think about. One is we have a ton of pens and paper and pencils, in our arsenal at home, in our couches, in bowls. I know I do. And it's important that we gather all of that information or all of those tools up. And that we see what we need after we've gathered all of those things up. I know oftentimes we don't think about that. And then we go and we buy these things and we come back home and notice that we still have these things in our arsenal. I know for my son, one of the things that I noticed was when school ended, there were notebooks, that he didn't use for that year. So it's important to make sure that you see what's in your arsenal first before you go out and you purchase it. Just like when you're going to the grocery store as well, you want to make sure that you make a list of everything that it is that you need, and so that you're going into that retailer with exactly what it is that you need and not things that you're just picking up along the way. That will absolutely help families save. And then lastly, at the very beginning of the year, supplies for school are a lot cheaper. And
Hmm.
it's important that you buy in bulk so that you're able to get everything that you need, as opposed to some of the things that you'll get in silo, which will cost you more over time.
Definitely. Are there any other resources that you would suggest outside of shopping for parents?
Yeah, you know what? The budgeting is important, and I know we talk about this in our Wells Fargo branches where customers are able to come in and get financial health sessions. I want to share a quick story because I know the amount that you can save. A lot of times, folks feel like they can't. Um, there's this thing that I do, and I've been doing for several years, where I put $2.50 away for all my nieces and nephews every single pay period. You figure most folks are getting 26 paychecks in a year, some 24. And when you think about that $2.50, it doesn't sound like a lot of money. However, that's $60 per niece and nephew that I have that I can disseminate for their birthdays and or for Christmas. $800, at the end of the day, that I don't have to pull out from a credit card or anything else that it will negatively impact me. I had a customer some years ago who adopted that same practice and actually was able to save a little over $60,000 over the course of 10 years, for his son. He had called me in 2018 to let me know that his son bought his first car, and that
Hmm.
car was paid in full just because of that simple practice. I tell folks that practice doesn't make perfect, but practice makes permanent. And it's important that you start to develop these permanent behaviors so that you can be successful financially.
That's a pretty old school method, sort of like the piggy bank situation.
Absolutely. Pay yourself.
Very cool. Very cool. It's funny that you brought up credit. I'm curious to know, what have you seen among families who've been utilizing credit, given budget constraints? Why is that dangerous and how common is that?
Yeah, I think that when we start to rely on credit as our sole means to get the resources that we need, we can definitely fall into some issues. And I see it, every day inside of the bank. And that's why I think it's wise that folks are going into their financial institutions and that they're talking about what they really need versus what wants are, and then really explaining, what credit is. I know when I first started college, rather, bombarded by these credit card companies around trying to get a credit card. And I spent my first $500 that they gave me and then realized that I had to pay that money back. And it put me in a situation where I was delinquent, for that credit card up until I got that education that I needed from the bank. And so we're called to make sure that our communities are informed around what they need, what their credit needs may be, and or that they're in the right credit product, where you have folks who are getting credit cards as opposed to getting loans. When you think about the difference there, where a loan is meant to be paid off versus this credit card, where you have this variable interest rate that may or may not go up. And quite frankly, a lot of folks can't afford to pay those off. And so making sure that you're in the right product so that you can get things taken care of accordingly. The last thing, and I know Denise mentioned this when she talked about housing in particular. DC offers so many programs out there for housing. One in particular, I know, are for first-time home buyers. And while I know folks think that I cannot afford in DC, I would challenge you to go into your local financial institution and get that pre-approval. The first time I bought a home was when I was 23, and I definitely didn't make a lot of money. But I went into a bank and I found out what it was that I qualified for. And that's all you need. Find out what you're qualified for and then go out and start shopping. Now, you might not get the home of your dreams, but you will get something. And that something is something that you can improve over time. But home ownership is the one thing that I feel like folks can leverage for generational wealth. There was an article that came out in CNN that specifically talked about the disparities between families of color versus white counterparts, and where white counterparts were in 2019, I believe, home ownership was about 72% versus 42% for Black families. When you think about paying that college tuition, not thinking about the scholarships and resources that your family needs, a lot of folks have been able to leverage that home and the equity that they've been able to take out the home to pay for that stuff so that that child comes out with no debt, rather than a lot of our youth in communities of color who come out with debt and they have to pay that back, plus, the bills that they have because they're living on their own. And so go out and challenge yourself to apply for a home loan, try to get a pre-approval to see, what that may be, and then go shopping. I know I've had several of my friends and folks that I've talked to who have been able to get approved and are homeowners today, which is going to benefit them down the line.
I like the direction this conversation is going in. We sort of expanded it. Could you go more into the competing expenses, that families might have around this time of the year? Earlier you mentioned buying in bulk, which I'm pretty sure our audience can agree is a very, very suitable solution. You can sort of spread out the supplies over time. But with the summertime coming to an end, right, what are some of the expenses that you see parents often grappling with that are competing with school supplies?
Yeah, I think we also forget with school supplies comes the cost of clothes, right? I'm just going to put myself out there. My son is as big, if not bigger than me now. And sometimes I think, why go to the store when I have plenty of clothes that I can pass down to my son myself? And these families have children in their household where you have clothes that might not be worn out, where you can pass those down. Really think about what you have in your arsenal and what you can pass down before you go out and start spending a lot of money, because one of the biggest costs to school supplies are back to school clothes. And when you think about in December and in January, where the costs are typically lower because they're getting rid of inventory, are the best times that you want to make sure that you go out and you bulk up on that and then take those out when the time comes.
Do you sort of see families experiencing the same sort of issues, like regardless of income level? We're talking about middle class, working class, and more so-called higher class.
I would say they're all the same. And Denise mentioned going into and leveraging community organizations. I know most recently I'm a member of Alpha Phi Alpha, the Omicron Eta Lambda chapter, and we had a community day where they were able to give backpacks, a couple of hundred backpacks out to the community. There are churches and nonprofits who are giving, things away, no questions asked, to folks in need. And I think it's about making sure that you leverage your resources as well. The Washington Informer just, Denise opened up with gonna put some resources out there to see what are some of these organizations that are giving out things, that you leverage that intel so that you can go out and be favorable at the end of the day and not in debt.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And just to wrap this up, if you can, we're going to get a bit personal. Your son's going back to school this year, and you spoke a little bit about how you're preparing. If you wouldn't mind expanding on that, just showing us, a little bit into your life.
Yeah, well, I've already shared. When I'm wearing my clothes every day and I think about the clothes that maybe I can't fit anymore, he's the first person who comes in and he looks at those clothes before we go out and we donate clothing to the community. And then, of course, we'll go out and we'll buy clothing. But the one thing that I really believe in doing for my son is making sure that he understands the value of a dollar. Around this time in particular, I want to make sure that he understands what's the cost that's associated with the supplies that he's going to get. After he understands that cost, what are some things around the house that you can do to include yard work that will earn you that money so that you can go out and buy that stuff yourself. I know this summer he's done some ad hoc jobs to make sure that he's built, some of those reserves so that when school starts, he can be armed with going out and getting those. And then this is his senior year, and so there are a lot of costs that are associated with that, and it's important that he knows what those costs are, because I'm not a bank myself, and I can't just divvy out that money. But I think the more that our youth know what those costs are that are associated with the things that they want to get, the better armed they are. I would ask parents to go out to handsonbanking.org, which is a website that gives hands-on knowledge around budgeting, credit, any financial needs, education specifically for youth. I do a hands-on banking simulation with schools across Washington, D.C. That really teach them the value of a dollar, where they'll get a profile. They are a professional. They have a salary. They may have children. And the point of the simulation is to go through the simulation and making sure that at the end you come out favorable and that you have some money in the bank. And so they'll have to buy a car. They'll have to get gas. They'll have to buy food. They have all of these expenses that they have, and they want to come out favorable. But it gives them an opportunity to see what their parents go through every single day.
I like that. I can totally dig that. Mr. Brown, thank you once again for joining us. It's been quite a pleasure.
Absolutely. Same here. Thank you for having me.
Yes, sir.